Hey y'all, welcome back to Adjuster Hour. I'm Nat, and this space where is the space where claims professionals get insights, clarity, and practical tools to elevate their game. Today's episode is fire, especially if you handle storm claims, severe weather losses, or complex weather-related disputes. We're joined today by Dan Schreiber, or call him Dan the Weatherman, a certified consulting meteorologist and senior VP of meteorology at JS Health. Dan's work spans hundreds of weather related insurance matters across North America, from forensic weather analysis to expert testimony in court. Dan, welcome to Adjuster Hour.
Thanks, Nat. Yeah, good to
Yeah,
be here. Yeah,
if
good
you
to be
want,
here.
please give us a little introduction.
Yeah, well, I think you did a good job. But
Yeah.
yeah, Dan Schreiber. I'm a meteorologist, primarily focusing in forensic meteorology, uh, education and background, obviously in meteorology, done a wide scope of work across North America, but even other portions of the world.
Oh, wow.
Background in the military, then kind of came over to the private sector. So
Okay.
just happy to be here with you today, Nat.
Yeah. I'm so happy to have you again. We've been LinkedIn followers for a long time, and I've been watching your work, and I'm so happy that you got to come on the show finally and share some really good insight. We have some really good questions for you today. So let's just jump right on in. For our listeners who might be newer to this title, can you share what it means to be a certified consulting meteorologist and how does that differ from other meteorology roles?
Yeah, sure. So meteorologists are most meteorologists, I should say, are they go to school. You get a 4-year degree in meteorology, and then you become a meteorologist. Some of the broadcast industry, of course, especially some of the smaller markets in the TV world, they will have meteorologists that don't have a degree, but they can speak well and so forth. Um, a certified consulting meteorologist, though, is like a board certification. Is the easiest way to
Mm.
think of it. So, just like you would have a board certified attorney or a board certified accountant or a board certified medical doctor, something like that. Well, this is basically a board certification in meteorology, which means that not only do we meet certain academic qualifications, but also certain experience qualifications, as well as go through a pretty tough gauntlet of examinations and so forth for this board certification. So it's not a mandatory thing, but if you're looking for top-notch consulting in the meteorology space, I would definitely recommend looking for a certified consulting meteorologist.
Okay, that's wonderful. So, what originally drew you into meteorology, and how did that path lead you into the insurance and claims space?
Yeah, well, Nat, before the show, you and I were talking about things that happen in life, and
Yeah.
you know, uh, so I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I was a kid.
Mm.
I mean, I had some ideas. I grew up. I'm young, Nat. I'm 35, so I grew up like you did, and when September 11th happened, for example, right? I
Hmm.
was still
Yeah.
still a kid, and I lived in San Diego County, California, and that's a big military community, and so. Um, a lot of my friends, dads were shipping out to Afghanistan, and then shortly thereafter Iraq, and doing all of that, and so and I was watching all this, live on TV, and and to me, I was like, oh, I wanted to, be a Marine and
Yeah.
go get the bad guys, right, and and but as life went on, I ended up in a military school for high school, and I ended up thankfully getting really good grades, and so I had some mentors, some teachers at that school, mentors that said, hey, Dan, you really need to go to college.
Hmm.
You can still go into the military, but you should go the officer route. You should get the military to pay for your college and then become an officer. And so that's what I did. So always it's always good to listen to your mentors, right? And that's what
Yeah.
I did. And basically, I didn't really like any of the options that the Air Force gave me to study in college, except for and it became the Air Force. That was the one that made the most sense. But the only thing that I could stand to study that they gave me an option of was meteorology.
Oh,
So
there
I
you
said,
go.
hey, like if I got to go to college, just might as well stare at the clouds, right? So
Yeah.
and that kind of the rest is history. So I worked in the Air Force for several years, and then decided it was time to leave that, and ended up
Yeah.
ended up starting my own business in forensic meteorology, and it kind of just morphed into what I am, and what I'm doing today. So
Yeah. What drew you to the insurance industry though? What was that shift like to where you could have done multiple things with that degree, but you were pulled over to the insurance side.
yeah, that all happened by the grace of God. Really, I don't really know how to say it any other way. Forensic meteorology is something that I had never really explored until I was starting my own business years ago. Right after the
Mm,
military, I noticed that a lot of my colleagues were operating in forensic meteorology. So I put it on my website that, hey, look, yeah, I can research past weather events, and it turns out that most clients in the forensic meteorology space are insurance related,
yeah.
whether that's adjusters or attorneys. So yeah, that's just kind of how it happened. I kind of just credit
Mm.
God's blessings, I guess is the best way of putting it, for leading me down that path.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah,
yeah,
sometimes things happen like that. Like I just posted on LinkedIn where I had a defining moment where I was standing in front of my home after Hurricane Katrina, and I told myself I was 16 and I said, I have to remember this moment and how it makes me feel. And I don't know why. I mean, I was only 16 years old, but I had the maturity in that moment to remember that heaviness, which in turn, as a claims professional, I've been able to experience that over and over again for other people, other my insureds. But sometimes things in life just give you that overwhelming feeling, or you just lead to that profession, and look at where it's brought you. It's brought you great, wonderful things. So things happen for a reason, and sometimes we can't explain that. But
yeah,
I do
absolutely.
want to know, was there, with all the storms that you've worked or been a part of and analyzed, was there a defining storm or a certain case or maybe a moment where you realized your work had a direct impact on the claim's outcome?
Um, I mean, it happens all the time. I
Okay.
think, and I knew you were going to have something like that,
Mhm,
and I was really thinking kind of deep about it, but and just kind of looking back and kind of
mhm.
where did I start in this insurance world, and where am I at now, and what kind of happened in those years. And
Sure.
I've had some really cool moments. I had a moment one time when after the Kentucky tornadoes several years ago. I got a call from Sky News, which is a UK based
Yeah.
you know uh, news station, and but they wanted me to on air in Abu Dhabi, virtually, of course, but they wanted me to talk about the tornadoes in Kentucky. And I thought that was really cool, like,
Yeah.
totally opposite end of the world, and they dubbed over me in Arabic and everything. By the way, tornado and hurricane are the same words in Arabic, I learned.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, so, that was like a cool moment. But, I think
Mhm,
one of the coolest moments, when I first kind of started this journey in forensic meteorology, there was, and I'm not going to say his name, but there was a gentleman who was very influential in the claims world, and in forensic engineering, forensic meteorology. He's just well published, still cited
mhm,
to this day. He's just very influential, and he was working the big files, right?
mhm,
Those files that, like,
mhm.
everybody wants them, but very few people get them, right?
Yeah.
And he was like the guy, right? And I kind of set my sights on him, and I said, I want to be like that guy, and
Yeah.
gosh, prayers answered. I think within that year, maybe two, but I mean it was pretty quick.
Sure.
I was sitting on the opposite side of the table as that guy, and we were. having some lively debates about what the weather was. But it was one of those things where like I was like, wow, like
Yeah.
I'm working those files now,
Working
like
those files. Yeah.
you know, and it was really cool. Like it was a huge blessing,
Yeah, that's awesome.
mission accomplished, so
That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, we have a lively chat this morning. I want to say hello to a couple of our listeners. Hey, Richard, aka Brandon Price from South Carolina. LinkedIn user said Dan is a great pro and even better human. That's so awesome. Thank you for watching. Good morning, Josh Fisher. Good morning from Portland. Yes, we have a good day for talking about storms. Hello, Lance from Northwest Houston. Houston's so big, you got to be directional about it. John, good morning. Thanks for tuning in. Good morning. We got lots of people, Louisiana and Texas, and then good morning, Ernest from Chicago. So happy to have you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in today. So moving on, we're going to talk about where meteorology meets claims. So let's move on. When adjusters hear weather data, many think of basic wind speeds or hail reports. What are we not looking at but should be when we're looking at those reports?
Yeah, great question. So, um, back when I was in the military, we answered this question of, there's a difference between data and
Hmm.
information, and there's a difference between information and knowledge, and then there's a difference between knowledge and understanding. And it kind of follows, data leads to info, leads to knowledge, leads to understanding, right?
Hmm.
So data is what data is. It's just a bunch of zeros and ones at the end of the day, right? But is that data useful information to to your job, right? And that only gets us to the information part. Then we've got to have a knowledge. Well, okay, how does that information help us better, know and understand what we're dealing with as far as this claim is concerned, right? And so I think the best answer to your question, I'm not opposed to data. I'm a data junkie. I have, when I go and start investigating claims or weather for claims, I start looking at lots and lots of data. But I'm able to take that data and turn it into a meaningful understanding to the client, and I think that really helps the
Hmm.
process, right? Like, and if things go crazy, and it's always, I think, our goal to settle these things before, so everyone's happy, right? But if things go off
Hmm.
the deep end, right, that knowledge and that understanding of that original data, right, is what um, is what helps the jury understand. And
Sure.
so I think if we understand the data as simply just data, that's
Mhm.
fine. The problem becomes when we start looking at that data as the end all be all without the information, knowledge, and understanding. That becomes a problem.
Well, I think I can speak for a lot of adjusters that we are being told to use these wind reports, hail reports that you get from various websites. We use this as a tool to support our findings. However, we we don't know how they are gathering that information. How did they produce those results? You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, and it's getting scarier as we're getting more and more of those, and we've got AI now that's
Hmm.
at the click of a button, you can get like kind data. Yeah, I mean, and you kind of made my point for me, but yeah, we don't know
Hmm.
where these numbers are coming from, right?
Sure,
We don't know where these
sure,
wind speeds are coming from. We don't know what's inside the algorithm. These companies, they won't tell you. It's proprietary. It's trade secret. It's
sure,
it's something they don't
sure.
want to tell their competitors. You're definitely not going to tell you.
Hmm.
And the way that again, the way that I explain this is if I'm sure most folks listening have had to be deposed at some point in time or been to court, for a claim that went the wrong way, and
Mhm.
you know, went sideways, right? You know, you know, there's a certain standard, right, for expert testimony, right? And that standard for expert testimony is that you've got to use reliable principles and methods. You've got to use sufficient data, you know, to make your opinion, right? Those are certain. It's called the Daubert standard. There's these certain standards that you've got to have to produce an opinion, right?
Mhm.
Well, these automated hail and wind reports won't tell you the methods that they use. They won't tell you the reliability of those methods. And so it'd be equivalent to, like, let's say, Nat, you know, you get to pose and you said, well, there was no high winds on this date of loss. You know, well, how do you know that? Well, I relied on this automated weather report. Well, how did that come to its conclusion? Well, I don't know, right? That's not a
Mm.
very good answer, right?
No, no. That's my worst nightmare is saying that answer being deposed.
Right, right, and that's my point. Is if I went up to on the stand and said, "Well, here are my findings, but I'm not going to tell you how I found them." You know,
Sure.
rightfully slow. I'm going to get a Dauber challenge. The judge is most likely going to agree that I shouldn't be testifying. He's going to
Hmm.
kick me out, right? You know, well,
Hmm.
then why did we rely on all these reports? You know, that
Yes.
won't tell you how they're finding what they're finding. You know, if they can't even do so reliably. And let me say one more thing, Nat. I'm not a lawyer.
Please.
Preface this. I'm going to preface this. I'm not a lawyer, but there is, and there's. You can go online and look at it, right? Federal Rules of Evidence 707 is a new proposition, right? That's being proposed. It's
Hmm.
not in effect yet. That basically puts the same standard, right,
Hmm.
of rigor to automated AI produced data, right, as it
Hmm.
does to experts in Federal Rule 702. So this is something that we're going to see, I think, really heavily scrutinized in the coming, you know, in the next few years, especially as more AI stuff gets rolled out. Is much more scrutiny on this automated data, uh,
Hmm.
you know, and how it needs to comply. If this rule goes through, again, I'm not a lawyer, but if you know, if
Hmm.
this rule goes through, the way I read it is that, hey, this data needs to still meet the same standards, right? And I think that's going to be tough to do. And I think that everybody who uses this data should recognize that there are some, you know, significant limitations to it.
Yeah, because my biggest thing is that I think okay, so we use the data. Let's say we have a hail claim and we go on site, we see hail. We see what appears to be hail damage to the shingles, maybe we have some collateral damage, and then we pull the hail report and we get a hit on the data loss saying yes, there was 2.5-inch hail. We're like,
Hmm.
great, this works out in our favor because what I'm seeing matches the data that I produced. That's great. We close the file, we move on. But what happens when you go on site, you find what appears to be hail damage, and then you produce a report and you get nothing, or you get very small of a very maybe you get 0.5-inch hail, and you're like, wait a second, this data doesn't match what I saw, and then your file all of a sudden gets real messy, and I feel like it's so unnecessary to make the file messy, but that is the reality, Dan, of what's happening. Hopefully I can't. I'm not speaking for all adjusters, but I think that is happening across the board. You get the data, so you know, my question to you is, should we be using the data when it works in our favor? Because sometimes it's not going to work in our favor. So should we really be using, that as the end all, tell all?
Yeah. You know, I try not to look at it as only use data when it helps me and don't use data when it doesn't help me. That's, you know, but, um, you know, I think the data is fine if you want to look at it, right?
Mhm.
And I think this gets into a couple of, you know, where you kind of wanted to head with this discussion, so we can kind of bring it up, right? Like,
Sure.
yes, exactly what you're saying happens all the time, right?
Mhm.
Like I've seen, and I've worked extensively with both public adjusters and insurance adjusters. So I've worked both sides. I know how both, like I've done it. I've done both.
Yeah.
I've testified on both sides of the aisle. I'm very even keeled when it comes down to this, right? But I've seen, especially I noticed it more on the public adjuster side, they'll walk up with like 6 different hail reports, all saying different things, right? Like, you know, and it's like, golly, like you really muddied the waters here. Like,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know, like if you needed 6 of them, you know, and there was actually a case, I think it was in Oklahoma, where the judge even was like these didn't even permit it. Like it was just like these
Mhm.
don't even make sense. But anyway, that all being said, like let's get into what what is involved in a storm damage insurance claim, right? And there's really three things, that are.
Mhm.
And I wrote an article about this, right? But if you think of it like a Venn diagram with the three circles, and they kind of intersect with each other, right? Right? You have three main expertises that I think are needed for storm damage insurance claim, right? And that is obviously the adjuster, somebody who understands the policy, right? And then you have a damage expert, whether that's an engineer, a roofer, estimator, appraiser, whatever, somebody who knows the damage, what it costs, if it is it damage, is it not damage, when did it,
Sure.
is it old damage, whatever, right? And then it's a storm damage claim, right? So then you have to have the storm expert, right? The
Mhm.
storm expert being the meteorologist, right? So if you take away any one of those three circles, right, you're
Mhm.
left with, okay, you got policy, you've got damage expert, but you don't have a storm,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Mhm.
you still need that storm to happen within the policy period. It still needs to be a covered event, that sort of stuff, right? You still need that storm to create that damage, right? So those all three things need
Sure.
kind of interrelated, right? Um, so I don't know if I really answered your question or not, other than if there are discrepancies
Mhm.
that you're finding, right, where the hailstorm doesn't, the hail data doesn't match the damage, right? Like
Mhm.
then that might be something where you really need to get a meteorologist involved
Sure.
to really make that determination. Now, you don't need a meteorologist on every storm damage claim. You really don't. I mean, think of all the
Mhm.
cat losses you've been to, and that were in the eye of the hurricane, or right down the center line of a tornado. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think you need a meteorologist to tell you, when the house isn't even there anymore, that it got hit by a hurricane, right?
Sure.
But I think once the dust is settled on all those, we'll call them easier claims, right? Once the dust
Mhm.
is settled on all that, right? What do we start seeing, right? Now we
Yep.
start moving out from the center line, right? We start moving out from the eye, and now you're in this area where, okay, we're in a part of the hurricane that only got 50-mile-an-hour winds. Did that really
Sure.
severely damage the roof of this house? Like, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm just going to tell you what the winds were. But my
Yeah.
point is those get to be a little bit more tricky. That's where you really,
That's what
I
we need. Yeah.
yes, you really need expertise on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the overwhelming consensus too is trust what you're actually seeing on site. Trust, okay, I'm seeing the hail on the shingle. I'm seeing collateral damage. Maybe I have, some soft metals, a fencing, splatter marks. Trust what you're seeing. So if you're seeing 2.5-inch hail on the report, it says 0.5 inch. Trust, okay, I'm consistently seeing the same size hail at this location. I can trust that this is a hail event, and I can go ahead and move forward with the claim. I'm not going to deny it because it says point 0.5, and there's no way 0.5-inch hail caused damage. So we got to be careful
Hmm.
on how we use the data. But I think we should be using the data consistently, not just when it works in our favor and when it doesn't muddy the waters. That's the problem. But like what you're saying too, and we get that a lot, is that there's a hailstorm that comes through Baton Rouge, and then we get reports in the neighboring parish city that there was hail. We go on site, we don't necessarily see that. Maybe we see a little bit of hail. That's when we can go, okay, let's bring in somebody. We don't think there was a storm event, but we need the meteorologist now to come in and to confirm that for us.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, and I think if you show up on site and you've got baseball sized dents, all over. I mean, obviously
mhm.
you got, looks, and it looks like legitimate hail damage, right?
Yeah.
But your report is only giving you point 0.5 on that day, I guess,
Mhm.
and I guess my next question would be, is that from a historical hailstorm from a
Mm,
different day,
yeah.
and maybe it's a few years old.
Sure.
Maybe that report is right for the date of
Mhm.
loss.
Yeah. Yeah.
And meteorologists are really the only, besides eyewitnesses,
Mhm.
video evidence or something like that. Meteorologists are the only one that can say, that are really qualified to say, yes, there was a big storm this day 5 years ago, right?
Sure.
Like that hit
Sure.
this property, right? We can
Okay.
we can't necessarily date the damage, but we can date the storm that did the damage, right? So
Okay, I see
yeah,
what you're
yeah,
saying. Yeah.
yeah,
No,
yeah.
that's a good point. That's a good point. So getting back to our questionnaire here, how often do you see losses attributed to the wrong weather event or incorrect timing? So that's kind of what we were just talking about, but how often do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just one piece of the puzzle, of course.
Yeah.
And so I provide the weather information, and I'm really good about staying in my lane, right? And I tell
Okay.
everybody that I work, stay in your lane, right? So I'm going to tell you when the weather happened.
Hmm.
Um, but the obvious ones, right, are like when the date of loss, there was no storm event,
Hmm.
right? Like
Hmm.
really, I shouldn't say it's undisputed, but it's pretty clear there was no storm
Yeah.
event. It was clear skies that day, whatever, so those are the ones, and I see that quite a bit. I see that quite a
Mm.
bit where there's a data loss out there, and there's nothing that happened. It was a nice blue sunny day. There's a report, down the street, in the news or something about it being, one of those days where everybody went to the swimming pool because it was just so beautiful, and it's like I'll take a snippet of that and put it in the file. Like the data loss doesn't make sense, right?
Hmm.
So I would say that happens quite a bit. I would say that happens quite a bit. But we've certainly worked some that are a little more tricky, where there was a storm, for example, on the unclaimed date of loss, right? But it wasn't as bad of a storm at the property as it was a
Hmm.
couple miles away, say at the airport. Right? Everybody wants to migrate to, the airport wind was 80 miles an hour,
We see
right?
that a lot.
Yeah,
Yes, we
yeah,
see that a
yeah.
lot.
Right. And no doubt, maybe the airport wind was 80 miles an hour. Are we adjusting the airport, or are we adjusting the property that was 3 miles away? Right.
Yeah.
And maybe the property also got 80-mile-an-hour winds, but a lot of
Hmm.
times it's not like that.
Hmm.
Maybe in hurricanes to a certain extent, but in more isolated wind gusts and so forth from thunderstorms, sometimes it could be quite different in a matter of a few miles. And
Okay.
I would definitely encourage adjusters, really on both sides, you know, really understand the storm that you're
Mhm.
looking at, right? And if it was an isolated microburst, a couple of miles can make all the difference in the world as far as weather.
Okay,
Right.
that brings us to a really good question we got from the audience, and this is a very long question, so I'm gonna paraphrase it because it can't even fit into my screen here.
Mhm.
Dan, thank you for your service. My apologies for being long-winded. I'm glad you brought up wind reports. The question is, in your experience, how accurate are wind speeds taken 5 to 10 miles away from a specific address?
Yeah, and he says, especially a down. I see something about a
Yeah.
downburst.
Especially
Um,
when a downburst or localized high gust event impacts the property in question.
yeah, so that it's case by case basis, but
Mhm.
downbursts um, downbursts can be quite small, on the order of a mile wide, 2 miles wide, sometimes even less.
Mm.
And that's all the way across. So if you're on the edge of it, then maybe only a quarter mile away they didn't really have high winds at all, right? So yeah, so they can be really isolated. I've seen some downburst. There was one that happened earlier this year up in Dallas Fort Worth area that had a pretty extreme wind gust right there at the airfield at DFW Airport. Um, but it wasn't until several days later, like meteorologists really had to look at that gust because it didn't register. There's weather sensors all over the airport. It's kind of important
Mhm.
for aviation, right? It so just DFW is a decent sized airport, but it's relatively small compared to the city of Dallas and Fort Worth and that
Sure,
metro area,
sure.
right? You know, other sensors on the airfield didn't record anything even close to it, right? It
Mm.
just hit one sensor, and it was probably as isolated as maybe a football field,
Mm. I
and
see.
so it was, people were wondering, well, did it just malfunction? Did the sensor malfunction? No, it was, I think they determined it was legitimate, but it was just incredibly isolated. So yeah, I think we have to really be careful about
Mhm.
our use of
Okay.
5-10 mile away weather stations in certain events like downbursts. Now, if we're working a different kind of wind event, like we have going through the Central Plains right now, where it's a widespread cold front that's coming through, it's probably going to be pretty similar, right? Like it's a widespread it's going across several states. Same thing like a hurricane, right?
Mhm.
If you're kind of in that meaty part of that hurricane, the weather sensor 5 miles away is supposing it's appropriately cited,
Mhm.
is probably somewhat accurate to what you're dealing with.
Okay.
Probably not,
Yeah, I gotcha.
not every time, but yeah, it really. So that's my point. Is
Mhm.
these automated wind reports won't tell you what kind of wind event you're dealing with. They just give you a number and then hope
Mhm.
you like do what you want with
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah, do it.
Uh, you know, but that makes all the difference in the world whether it's an isolated
Mhm.
microburst or it's a wind event that lasted all day. Or if it's a hurricane or it's a derecho. It doesn't tell you
Yeah.
that. And
No,
that's
no.
really important. It's really important. So
No, I love that. No,
yeah.
that brings clarity to our usage of that. So I'm glad we talked about that. So let's talk about, kind of what you do. Can you explain how radar, satellite data, surface observations work together in the forensic analysis at, kind of at a higher level?
Yeah. Um, we use weather radar in just about every investigation that we do
Hmm.
for hail and thunderstorm winds and hurricanes and all of that. Weather radar data is really cool because, um, at least in most cases in the U.S., we can put the property right that the claim where the claim loss happened. Right, we can put that on the radar screen. Same thing with the satellite. We can put that on the screen and see what that storm looked like as it moved directly over the property, right? So we start working with data that is effectively on site or in the sky right above
Mm.
it, right?
Sure, sure.
Instead of sole reliance on like we were talking about an airport 5 miles away. And so that gives us an idea of hail size right there. Let's talk about that for a minute. Like hail is really important.
Hmm.
A lot of folks utilize, let's just get rid of the automated reports for a second. A lot of folks utilize, the NOAA, the National Weather Service NOAA storm
Yeah.
report, right?
Yep. They
You know,
do.
which by the way are incredibly misplaced often, not always, but often, and that we have a lot of problems with them being in the wrong locations, wrong latitude and longitude. There's a lot of errors, a lot of documented errors. It's not just me
Mhm.
saying it. Like there's a lot of errors with that, right? But let's just assume it's correct for the purposes of this discussion, right? Um, I don't really care if there was a baseball-sized hail report a mile away, right?
Mhm.
That doesn't tell me we're not adjusting a mile away. We're
Yeah.
adjusting the property, right? And I'll tell you, there can be a big difference in hail size even within a mile.
Mhm.
And so when you look at the weather radar, when a meteorologist looks at the weather radar and properly interprets that weather radar, we can make a determination of what the hail size was at the property. Maybe that baseball sized hail report a mile away is in the exact same portion of the storm that the property was. That makes our job a little bit easier, right?
Mhm.
But maybe the baseball sized hail report was on a certain portion of the storm that did not move over the property despite the proximity, right?
Sure.
And we can make that determination. And yeah, there's been cases where we've had big hail reported a mile away, even half a mile away, right? But
Mhm.
the property was in the clear. I
Mhm.
don't that doesn't happen often, but it does happen.
It does. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's really cool. Kind of a I wouldn't really call it a war story, but just one of the why that's important, right? Is just
Mhm.
because I worked a I worked I've worked a bunch of files up in the Denver area, and it's kind of hail, a lot of hail up there, a lot of wind up there, but
Yeah.
a lot of hail up there, and there was a very large condo homeowners, I think it was a homeowners association. Anyway, one of those big, I call them house farms, right? Uh, just hundreds of dwelling units.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
you know, and they had switched. They were on a market, like market coverage, right? So several different carriers and all that, and but they had switched carriers, if you will, from one night to the next, right? And
Mm.
policy, had expired on one at midnight, and at midnight 01, whatever, it was on this new policy, right? Well, there were storms in that particular area on both the day before and the day after, right?
Mm.
Hailstorms, both and big hailstorms, right? Um, and so it no damage expert, no engineer, no building consultant, no adjuster that I know of is going to be able to climb up on a roof and say this hailstone fell yesterday and this hailstone fell today, right? Like
Mhm.
the damage is going to look just similar size,
Mhm.
right? Like this spatter is 1 day older than that spatter, like that, come on.
Yeah.
And and so but a meteorologist is going to be able to tell you, hey, look, I know there was another storm yesterday, in this town, right? But it missed
Hmm.
this property. I don't remember what my conclusions were, to be honest with you, but I'm kind
Yeah.
of using it as an example, right? But
Sure. Sure.
it's one of those where it made all the difference in the world, because this was not.
Yeah.
It's a multi-million dollar loss, depending on whether it happened
Yeah. It's
24
very
hours earlier
important.
or 24 hours later, right? And so that, I think that's why it's really important to use, properly use weather radar data
Mhm.
to determine.
Sure. No, that's a perfect example. That makes all the difference in the world. But let's see. What's the biggest misconception adjusters have about the hail size, wind speed, or storm severity? Like what's the biggest misconception that, a regular Joe adjuster has?
Um, I've heard a lot of things, good and bad. So it's hard to I don't it's hard. Let me tell you, and I'll just kind of speak outside of just adjuster. Let's
Yeah,
just talk about
sure.
industry, right? Let's just talk
Mhm.
about industry. I think the most common phrase and misconception that I hear is that the damage tells the story of the weather. I don't need a
Mm,
weatherman. I don't need a meteorologist. The damage tells me the story, right?
mm, okay.
I hear that all the time. Um, and there's some truth to that. Unless you're on parametric coverage, an insurance carrier is generally not liable because a storm happened. They're liable because a storm caused damage, right? Right.
Yeah.
So just because weather happened doesn't mean that there's necessarily a legitimate claim, right?
Mhm.
At a very high level, at least, right? But um, I will flip that back around to folks who have this belief that the storm tells the story. Excuse me, the damage tells the story of the storm, right?
Mm,
Um, if you believe that, then weather must tell you the story of the damage. Nobody
mm,
believes that, right?
yeah.
Like, and so uh, I think I would encourage people not to think that way.
I love that. No, that's great.
Damage tells the story of the damage,
Yeah.
right? Weather
Yeah.
tells the story of the weather, right? And you
Yeah.
need both
Mhm.
for for a proper claim adjustment, in my opinion, right? So, yeah, so I would encourage people not to think about damage tells the story of the weather, because if you believe that, then you have to admit, well, weather tells the story of the damage, and
Mhm.
um, that's just not true. Uh,
Yeah.
so.
Well, let's talk about you again. At what point should an adjuster go, okay, let's wave the red flag. We need to bring in a meteorologist. What's that tipping point?
um, Y'all's call.
Mhm.
I mean, I would always say, if something looks fishy, bring in the
Mhm.
meteorologist right away.
Okay. Okay.
You had kind of given this example of 2-inch hail or something like that, and
Sure.
and and,
Sure.
and a half-inch hail report, right? Like, to me, that it seems like kind of a red flag, and it doesn't
Mhm.
mean it's a red flag on behalf of the policyholder,
Sure. Sure.
or their PA or their roofer. Like, there's just a discrepancy in the data, right?
Mhm.
Versus what you're seeing on site, and it might be one of those things to, hey, we just need to double check, do our due diligence
Okay.
and double check. Was there really a 2-inch hailstorm on the
Mhm.
date or in this policy period or whatever? You know, or not. So I would say that those are probably,
Mhm.
like I said, you don't need a meteorologist on every claim, right? But
Sure.
when there starts to
Sure.
be, you start to have this data that can maybe conflicts with other data.
Conflicting data.
Yeah, right. Like, I think that's really important. I would also say I think it's smart, um, just based on my experience in the industry, and I read a lot of case law too. But I think it's really smart that folks not we talked about this, but put a whole lot of reliance on those automated reports that inevitably people are still going to use, right?
Yeah.
If it's
Mhm.
if it's just a data point and that's all it is, fine, right?
Mhm.
But it's when folks start relying solely on those reports to
Mhm.
base their entire coverage opinion or their entire opinion on data
Yes.
or
Yes.
everything. That's I don't think that's smart.
Okay. Okay.
And I would say that if you need to rely on weather data for your opinion, not just an anecdotal, hey, look, it agrees, but but if you need to say because the weather was this or not this, my
Mm,
opinion is this, right? That's when you need a meteorologist, because then all you have to say when you're under questioning
mm,
is, I consulted a meteorologist.
mm,
If you want more information about how that opinion is generated,
mm.
go talk to the meteorologist, and then I'm going to be
Sure.
able to give you a very thorough, educated, detailed explanation of why it is what it is, right? And it absolves y'all as adjusters or anybody else listening, right, that are not meteorologists from having to explain very technical meteorological things. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's just smart to work that way.
And it's important, adjusters, it's okay if you don't, if you, it's okay that we don't know that answer. We're not supposed to know. We're not supposed to know the meteorologist is answers. That's y'all's expertise, but it's our responsibility as the adjuster to raise the red flag and go, wait a second, we need a forensic meteorologist on this claim. And that's perfectly okay to wave that flag. I think it just shows how good of an adjuster you are when you can say, hey, something doesn't make sense here, or we need a little bit more data to be conclusive on our findings. But I love that. I love that. Um, let's see. We kind of talked about this already about the microclimate variation, how it affects losses in the same neighborhood. I mean, do you see that often where there is like a little, maybe a little microburst and it's affecting certain areas of a neighborhood, and you come in and you're able to clarify that for the adjuster?
Yeah, yeah, I have, and I think that happens actually quite a bit on
Okay.
larger properties. Think well, think like school districts, for example, that got properties all over town, right? Or large campuses like a college campus, university campus, or a lot of these realty or investment companies. Like I said, they have properties that are all over a big city, right? And what we notice is you know, they one or two of those, maybe half of their properties got hit by a decent storm, right? But what ends up on the claim inevitably, right? All of the properties,
Oh, yeah.
right? Yeah, and 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 at that point, yeah, I mean, we do notice that, of course, and like I said, even college
Mhm.
campuses, they can be some of them can be pretty wide, and so like I worked one recently that was like a tornado. It was a tornado event that went tornado was over part of the campus and not over the other part.
Sure.
And so and I don't recall in that one if there was a different provision for tornado versus straight line wind damage. I don't recall, but that happens from time to time.
Mhm.
Where there might be a different deductible for a certain, depending on how the event, either how strong the winds were or what the event was classified as. And so getting into the nitty gritty of what actually happened, even if it may be different from one side of the campus to the other side of the campus or one side of town to the other side of the town, I think that's really, really important.
Sure.
And can be millions of dollars at the end of the day when it comes down to not only just the covered damage, or lack thereof, but also deductibles and stuff like that. So,
Yeah. We have a comment, and this leads to my next question. So Stephen Harmon stated, hail can strike one house and miss, the house across the street. I was an adjuster and saw this personally. Can that brings me to my next question. Can two houses on the same street experience different storm impacts, and why is that?
yeah, I mean, I believe that the manifestation of damage will certainly
Mhm.
vary depending on
Okay.
structure and so forth. But yeah, I mean, the hail has got to start and stop somewhere.
Mhm. Sure, sure.
And so yeah, I think that can happen. I've heard stories um, of adjusters climbing on large like a mall roof, for example,
Mhm.
big building, right? And basically seeing where the hill swath was, literally from one end of the roof to the other, which is pretty, yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, it happens. It absolutely happens. And the other thing is that usually on most, well, a lot of properties at least, the house is really only a small portion of the actual property, right? And so, when we're talking about maximum hail size, it can often be plausible that that maximum hail size that fell at that property may not have struck the
Mhm.
roof of the house, right?
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
our storm spotters that are reporting hail, are they climbing up onto the roof and picking up the hail, or are they picking up it off of the ground that fell on the front lawn, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so, again, weather tells the story of the weather, damage tells the story of the damage.
Mhm.
I don't think it's smart to say, the damage is this, therefore, or there is no damage, therefore it didn't hail. Like I wouldn't
Mhm.
say that, right? Likewise, I would
Okay.
say it hailed, therefore there is damage, right? Like no, the
Yeah.
damage is what the damage is. The weather is what the weather is. If they match, great. If they don't match, then that
Sure.
happens. That happens.
Well, what do you say? And you might not be able to answer this
Yeah.
question, but I've been in this situation where I go, the roofer goes in the neighborhood, knocks on all the houses in the neighborhood, and goes, they don't even look at the roof. They go, "You got a hailstorm came through your neighborhood. We just replaced your neighbors, two houses down to the left. You know, they got a new roof. You have hail damage. Let's go ahead and file your claim. Let's get it started." We all know that spiel,
Hmm.
but the adjuster goes out. Okay, we inspect the property. There's no damage. All right. So we're put in a very awkward position where we have to tell the homeowner, look, there's no damage. I understand your neighbor had damage, but you don't have damage. What do you have advice for how we can explain that to the homeowner?
Uh, no,
No, you're on
not,
your own.
I'm not an adjuster or attorney, so yeah, you're on your own.
Yeah,
But
you're on your
yeah,
own. Yeah,
look, I can tell you about the weather, right? And
sure.
maybe a way, I'll tell you. I mean, I've seen a lot of claims that for damage that anecdotally, I looked at it and I was like, I don't think that was the storm.
Sure.
Of course, I don't write that anywhere, but I just kind of like, oh, I don't remember the storm even hitting this side of town, but they got,
Yeah.
so, uh, you know, I don't know. I guess that comes to how you want to deal with your insureds, and I
Yeah.
think always having empathy and trying to be a real human to them is important. But yeah, at the end of the day, I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. That's
Yeah.
why you get paid the big bucks and not me,
Yeah. Sure.
right?
Yeah, I just thought I'd ask because it's such an awkward. I mean, I think we've all been there as adjusters where we go up there, we're like, we start panicking because we're like, oh my gosh, there's no damage, and I have to go tell this insured, and I trust in my ability to tell what's been damaged and what's not been damaged. I think we've all been in that situation, so it's very awkward. I will tell you that, Dan. It is so unpleasant. But
Well, you're
moving
looking.
on.
I mean, I mean, that says a lot about you, though, Nat. Right? You're
Yeah.
looking for any way to open coverage, right? Like
Oh yeah, of
you know
course,
what I mean? And like, and,
of
and
course.
when you can't, like, you feel bad about it. And
You feel bad.
I
Yeah.
think that's what the other side of the aisle, right? Which I've worked in,
Mm,
right? But I think that other side
mhm.
of the aisle wants to paint you as a bad person. Oh,
Yeah.
of course they denied it. No, no,
Yeah.
no. Like you did everything you could to find coverage. It just doesn't
Yes.
exist. And you feel bad because you have to have a tough conversation.
Yeah.
That says a
We
lot
want.
about you, Nat. Like it really does.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
we want to find coverage for the insured. We want, if there is damage, we want to be able to pay for it. We want to get that resolved. But yeah. So thanks for that. I appreciate that. Let's move back. Let's talk about you a little bit more. How has meteorology and claims evolved over the last 5 to 10 years? Have you seen, an increase in your usage? Have you seen more understanding about what you guys do? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think there's been, well, we talked about AI, right? So AI is making its way in to the industry quite significantly right now. There every day it seems like there's this new AI platform where you can type in an address and pay some money and get a weather report, right? And I've actually had just to see where AI was at. I've used Copilot, the free Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, right? And I've just kind of
Mhm.
prompted it with a few things and see if it could generate a weather report for me. And I will tell you, after some prompts, granted you kind of have to know what to prompt it, but
Sure.
after some prompts, right? And I gave it some values of this, consider this, whatever, it generated a weather report that looked good. Like looked good. Was it scientifically sound? Yeah.
Wow.
Would I be able to crush it in court? Absolutely. But to someone who's not a meteorologist, it looks convincing, right?
Yeah.
And that's happening. That's happening, right?
Mhm.
I've seen opposing experts and so forth using AI to generate
Wow.
real looking weather information. It happens, right? I don't think it's rampant yet, but it's happening. You know, where else have I seen this? Oh, uh, yeah, I've seen attorneys, and I think this has been kind of all over LinkedIn, right? But we've seen this big thing about like attorneys using Chat GPT to write,
Yeah.
opinion briefs and stuff, right? And they're getting in trouble. Well, they're also using Chat GPT and these other, AI platforms instead of hiring opposing experts, right? So
Mm.
so it used to be back in the day as an expert, no matter what your expertise was, right?
Mhm.
Engineering, estimating, industrial hygiene. I mean, whatever, meteorology, right? It used to be back in the day if you were a meteorology expert, um, you were the smartest person in the room when it came down to deposition, right?
Yeah.
At best, the opposing attorney, right, had a meteorology expert of their own to kind of feed them some tough questions to ask you, right, to rebut you, right?
Mhm.
Opposing attorneys don't need that anymore, at least immediately, because AI has gotten to the point that it can find all the holes or at least find something to grill you in questions about, right? Sometimes those questions don't even make any sense.
Yeah.
um, but but let's just put it this way: attorneys are using
Mhm.
AI as rebuttal consulting experts,
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
for a lot of different professions, not just weather, but I see it
Mm.
on the weather side. I've seen AI generated questions in deposition. I know they're AI generated because the way that they're being asked doesn't
Yeah.
even make any sense, right?
Yeah.
But 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 I at least know my profession well enough to know that that question didn't make any sense and kind of
Yeah.
just wandered away, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that's happening. That's a major thing that's been happening in the past couple of years. In the past 5, 10 years, yeah, forensic meteorology, human forensic
Mhm.
meteorologist. I mean, the if I would have invested stock in human forensic meteorology and claims 5 years ago, like I'd be a millionaire. Like I mean, there are so many more of them now. It's so much more
Yeah.
widely utilized, and a lot of that has to do with, I think, more education has been brought out about what value we have, right? But
Sure.
also, there's been a lot of case law in the past 5 years where judges are throwing out experts, engineering experts, building consultants, so forth. They're throwing out their testimony because they opined on meteorology, yet were not
Mhm.
qualified to do so, right?
Yep.
And that's a bad
Well, we
day.
see that a lot. We see that a lot in the engineer reports, and I am being more mindful now of using that data as an end all when I see it in the engineering report because I believe engineers should stay in their lane. They shouldn't opine about the weather. So I completely get that.
I'm
Completely.
gonna send you. I'm gonna send you a present. You said that, but
Oh yay!
yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm on y'all's side. Trust me. Trust me. So in closing, what keeps you motivated in this line of work?
I'm extremely self motivated. You know how it is in the insurance world. You get beat to death every day, right? And so, um, you know, uh, at the end of the day, I really like the challenge of working a storm
Hmm.
that is just odd and different and difficult.
Yeah,
Because I'm one
yeah,
of those guys, I have to figure it out. I've always been
yeah.
like that ever since I was a little kid. I will sit there all day and all night until I figure it out,
Mm.
and not just
Oh,
figure
that's
it out to
awesome.
make it work, figure out because it does work,
Yes.
so that's I think that's what drives me. But hey, look, I work with really good people too,
Mhm.
and nothing beats working with good people. So,
That's
um,
awesome.
yeah, that's what
That's
keeps me going.
awesome. Well, where can people connect with you or learn more about your work?
LinkedIn really is probably the easiest way to find me. If you want to tag me in on the show,
Sure.
feel free to do that. Yeah, that'd be I work with JS Held, so you can always find me there. But find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest way, to be honest. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's how I found you is on LinkedIn. The hat. You and your
Oh
hat.
yeah. Oh yeah. So
Yeah, I'm surprised you're not
I
wearing it.
yeah, I was gonna say I brought the Christmas hat. Let's see. It's even got the
There
little.
you go.
There
Oh, I
we
love
go.
it.
Yeah.
I love it. There we go.
They're gonna make fun of me for days. Then yeah, I've got the other hat. This is my working man hat because it's
Yes.
super. The grosser it is, the more harder you work, and so yeah, um, yeah. I've got a bigger hat collection over there, but
Oh,
yeah.
I love it.
Thanks for
I
having me
love
on the
it.
show, Nat. Yeah, it's been awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would like to tell the listeners too, if you've ever, had a claim hinge on the storm data, type weather in the chat. Let us know. Dan will give you a little, comment or help you guys with any questions that you have. Reach out to Dan. But yeah, this has been good. Thank you so much. You've been incredibly insightful. Thank you for breaking down how meteorology truly impacts claims decisions and for giving us clearer lens on weather data now, timing, and forensic analysis. And for everyone watching or listening, today's conversation is a reminder that weather isn't just background noise in a claim, it's often the key piece of the puzzle. So, asking the right questions and knowing when to bring in expertise can make all the difference. If you found value in this episode, please like, share, drop a comment with your biggest takeaway, and make sure you connect with Dan on LinkedIn to keep learning from his work. So, as always, this is Adjuster Hour where we elevate the conversation, sharpen our skills, and help each other get better at what we do. I'll see you next time. Bye, you guys. Have a good one.